This past spring break, we traveled out to our nation's capital, out to Washington, D.C. to celebrate America's 250th birthday. While we were there, because of course we're Disney adults, we found all kinds of different references and connections to Disney.
That's right. We had to, of course, find a little bit of Disney anywhere we go, even if it's not Disney World. So join us as we take a look at some of the connections that span back all the way to the time of when Walt Disney was first getting started as an animator, way up to today in today's popular culture, to find all the Disney connections we saw in Washington, D.C.
Our first stop in DC is actually going to be to the National Archives. For a lot of people, when you think of the National Archives, you either have no Disney connection whatsoever, or your first automatic Disney connection is going to be the movie National Treasure. Now, this is a beloved, newer-ish live action. It's actually one of my personal favorite newer-ish live actions from Disney, where you've got a couple of different characters like Ben Gates who are going through and trying to find this treasure that's been hidden for generations in America, and the whole key begins with the back of the Declaration of Independence. So while you do get that connection, that's actually not going to be the only connection.
No. We did, of course, see the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and a few other main historical pieces of literature throughout American history. We did not see the preservation room where they make delicious jams and jellies. If you've seen National Treasure, you'll get that joke. But our main connection here to Disney actually is the one I mentioned in the beginning of our video that spans back to when Disney was coming up as an animator. So one of the galleries that they had in the National Archives was an interactive exhibit going through digital copies of some of the archive documents that they do have, but in an interactive environment with a lot of touch screens and everything like that. And one of these walls went through and talked about Walt Disney. And they have things in there from notes from his Laugh-O-Gram cartoons before he even started his own studio. There's a naval registry list in there for Roy Disney, his brother, the main architect of Disney World, for most of you that know that. And then it even goes into Walt Disney's efforts into World War II and the Victory Through Air Power propaganda cartoon that he did, which we'll actually touch on that portion of Disney's career again in a little bit when we take another stop down the line. But it was very interesting to see some of the notes and the handwritten stuff from Walt Disney.
You do get to see some other things in some of the other different places in California and in Florida with his sketches, but this was completely different in some of his very, very early animation, even beyond the Walt Disney Studios. So that was really cool and special in its own way.
Yeah. All right, well, that's it for the National Archives. That's kind of a quick stop that we'll take on our tour. The next one we're going to get to, we're going to take the longest time with, because there is an entire exhibit at our next stop that goes through popular culture. If you have already been there, you probably know we are on our way from the National Archives over to the American History Museum.
So our next stop here in DC is going to be at the American History Museum. There's actually a ton of ground to cover here, everything from technology to all this pop culture. There's actually an entire pop culture section to the American History Museum, a whole exhibit. That's where we're actually going to start. Okay, this exhibit has all kinds of different references to the Olympics, to Sesame Street, to things from Broadway, and of course to Disney as well. So we're gonna start here with one of my personal favorites. This is the oldest of those pieces that we've seen from Disney. It's the original Kermit the Frog puppet. Now, I love Kermit so very much, but this particular puppet kind of freaks me out a little bit, just being completely honest.
Yeah, Piggy definitely gave him a glow up over the years. Still a great piece of innovation from the legendary Jim Henson. And speaking of that Kermit puppet, you would have seen that already if you either subscribe to us here on YouTube or follow us on Instagram, where we already posted a short about that. So if you're not doing that already, make sure you go do so. That way you don't miss any of the other content we have between our videos coming out.
Now there was also a Fozzie Bear puppet there. We were able to see R2-D2 and C-3PO. You could find Bill Nye the Science Guy's robes, which was really cool.
Bill.
It's my favorite from the 90s. Then you could also see Indiana Jones's whip and his hat. That to me, because I love Indiana Jones, was one of my absolute favorite pieces in that exhibit, which was also really kind of cool because we were kind of on a treasure hunt for all these different artifacts ourselves in a different way.
Yeah, so like Jen said, the whole Entertainment Nation pop culture exhibit covered a lot of what we saw there. But then every once in a while, we also saw sprinkled throughout the American History Museum, you've got a very original pair of Mickey ears in a display case down in the bottom level there. There is another exhibit that goes through different technological innovations throughout the different decades of like the 1900s and even before. And oddly enough, one of the ones that we saw in there was a pair of 101 Dalmatians pajamas from the 90s, talking about how pajamas started bringing cartoon characters and everything like that in there into the family demographic of nighttime routine.
And all of that with globalization and just trying to connect pop culture references through technology and how everyone kind of created a common culture in that.
Yes, and like I mentioned when we stopped at the National Archives, we talked about Walt Disney's foray into World War II propaganda. We see a brief glimpse of that here in the American History Museum in the World War I, World War II exhibit space that they have. There's a brief blink and you'll miss it moment where you see cells of Donald Duck in what was a wartime propaganda cartoon, which was common for the time because Disney actually paused their studio for this reason.
This is one of my favorite things as a history teacher to tell people that not everybody knows. They realize that there's a lot of Disney animation going on in the 30s, and then a little bit into early 40, 41, mid 41, but then it kind of drops off and they don't really kind of piece two and two together as to why. And it's because Walt Disney Studios had paused all their animation for the studio itself to focus in total war of just trying to help with that patriotic propaganda and encourage people to support the war effort so that we could end World War II and Axis powers not continue to expand.
Yeah, you may not find those on Disney Plus, but I'm sure if you go into a deep dive somewhere in the internet, you'll find a lot of the wartime cartoons that Disney produced. All right, so that wraps up the biggest section we're going to have in the American History Museum. But now we're going to go to what most consider, at least I know I do, I think Jen kind of agrees with me as well, to be one of the most fun museums that's on the National Mall, where we can get our sci-fi kick going in. That being the National Air and Space Museum.
So our third stop on this trip is going to take us to the National Air and Space Museum, which of course is dedicated to all things with space exploration. It includes all kinds of newer exhibits, everything that you're looking at with all the newer explorations, and all the way back to when we first originally began trying to get into air to begin with. So with the Orville and Wilbur Wright brothers, just creating the first airplane and everything in between. You have a lot of different replicas of planes, of early planes, some original, some replicas. But my favorite thing here with our connection to Disney is that you've got a ton of Star Wars. So all of this is going to be, if you need that Star Wars fix, you go straight to Air and Space Museum. We found a mini Millennium Falcon replica, a TIE Fighter replica, and then a much, much larger X-Wing replica that's kind of like the focal point of upstairs, the second floor. It's hanging from the ceiling. If you aren't looking up, you might miss it if it's so crowded. But it's also got R2-D2 hanging in the back. We got a picture of this one. It was really, really cool to get to just find that literally hanging out.
So we know the force is strong with the Air and Space Museum. And kicking off that Star Wars note, we also found something that is a deep cut back even to Disney World and Disneyland history. They had miniature Captain Rex and the Starspeeder 3000 figurines from Star Tours, the original version of this ride, not the newer updated ones that we have today. This was by far the best thing I saw throughout our entire DC trip. I saw this and immediately geeked out because Star Tours, the original, is still one of my favorite rides, and frankly, it probably is a little bit of a hot take, but I still think that's the best Star Wars experience I've ever had in a Disney park, including Galaxy's Edge, which not the biggest fan of, but seeing Star Tours stuff in there was amazing. There was also a little blaster in there that I can vividly remember seeing at the Tatooine Trader store at the end of the ride in Hollywood Studios. Continuing on from Disney connections though, we also had a brief glimpse of WALL-E. They had about living on other planets and exploring further into space. We had WALL-E in there. Of course, we know that takes place way into the future, but, and then lastly, they had one of the areas Jen mentioned about early flight. And actually it's an area where they have a lot of replica planes, some of them originals, such as Charles Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis plane is in there. They had Plane Crazy, the old-time Mickey short, playing in a kids' play area there. So bringing the synergy between the kids and the actual historical impact that those cartoons were having at that time, showing the synergy between the two of those.
So our third, that's going to be it for our trip around DC, our Disney connections in the nation's capital. We hope that that inspired you to maybe go out and take your own trip to Washington, DC sometime. 250th anniversary is coming up this summer. Might be a little bit busy, but some other time also would be fantastic to find all these different Disney references and more. There were some that weren't there that we know are there at other times as well. So to be able to go see what you can find that's a Disney connection, and also to go see some other historical artifacts to our nation's capital and our founding as a country.
Yeah, we talked about all the Disney stuff today with a little sprinkle here and there of actual historical facts, such as the Charles Lindbergh plane and the propaganda cartoons and such. But take the time to go and explore a lot of these things as we come up to the big anniversary for our country this year, 250 years. Hard to believe that it's been that long, but also that we're around to see it. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, make sure that you like and subscribe to us here at the Disney Pros. We've got a lot more fun content coming up later this year as we get back into a more routine schedule after we have exited Maycember, as we like to call it in the teacher kind of school, end of school time. So we've even got our very first Disney cruise trip coming up that we'll see a lot of content coming from that. So make sure you subscribe to us here at the Disney Pros to see everything that we've got coming from that. Also follow us on Instagram, like I mentioned before, to see anything else we may post there. Well, that'll do it for us today. Thanks for joining us here in the Disney Pros, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.